PPC is not a race, it's a marathon. And thinking long-term and looking at your data sets in month and quarterly increments is really effective. And going week by week or day by day is not effective advertising.
This is the Ecommerce Braintrust, a podcast about building momentum online for established consumer brands. Join our hosts and their expert guests for high-level conversations about e-commerce strategies, trends, and innovations. Access our Braintrust and boost your brand's e-commerce potential.
Welcome back to the Ecommerce Braintrust podcast. I am your host, Kiri Masters, and I'm joined by your co-host, Julie Spear.
Hi, Kiri.
So today we're talking with Will Hare, who is a project manager at Bobsled Marketing. And Julie spoke with him last week about latency windows with PPC and attribution of PPC campaigns in Amazon. So Julie, this topic had been on our list of ideas to cover recently. What is it about this topic that made the cut?
You know, I think it's one of those that the data in Amazon it changes frequently over time. And often we field questions from clients about ACOS and we are frequently trying to explain, how long it takes the data to actually settle in Amazon so that the ACOS that we're reporting is actually a true data point. And what we found is because it seems so fluid within Amazon that we needed to do a little bit of digging and explanation around this topic as a form of education to help people understand when to look at the data, when to recognize that the data is still hasn't settled because data hasn't been fully attributed yet, and how to use that knowledge in the management of the PPC accounts. So it was it was an FAQ that we got a lot. And so we thought, yep, this makes sense to dig into a little bit more.
Yeah, what I like about your interview with Will is that you covered off all that terminology right up front. So if you listen to Julie's brief explanation and you already got a little bit lost, don't worry. All of those terms are explained pretty much at the top of the conversation. And then you get into the way that we look at reports at Bobsled and what is an appropriate time frame to be looking at certain reports and what what a good metric is, essentially.
Yeah, we start with heavy dictionary focus. The glossary of PPC on Amazon is at the front, and then what to do with that information and how to interpret your reports comes from there.
No, it's like my Spanish lessons.
There you go. It's the former teacher in me,
Yeah, this is a great one because you do go down the occasional rabbit hole, but I think it's really helpful to dive into those things because they are the questions that we get from clients about pulling out specific numbers in a PPC report, and some of them look really alarming, but it's potentially because there hasn't been enough time to really shake it out. And then also some numbers are alarming because they indicate something like a bad conversion rate and they should be pulled. So what's what? And that's what you guys get into in the interview. So let's roll it.
All right, here we go. I want to welcome to the pod today, or welcome back to the podcast today, Will Hare, who is a PPC manager with us at Bobsled Marketing. And Will, you're an official, friend of our podcast since this is your return visit.
Yeah, I'm fortunate to come back. So I must have made a really good impression on my first podcast and super happy to be back to talk about advertising.
Absolutely. You definitely made a good impression. So welcome back. And for today, we're going to dig a little bit more into advertising, which is definitely in your wheelhouse. And we're going to take somewhat of a foundational approach, a look at the foundations of advertising and give our listeners maybe a user manual as related to the terminology that is in PPC, and also ways to look at the data, how often to check the data, when we should make changes. A bit of the focus for today's podcast.
Absolutely. And super excited to talk about, how to interpret your Amazon PPC data and what does sales attribution mean on top of the latency windows that I know a lot of users on the Seller Central forum bring up often, the misunderstanding of how it works. So happy to be on here and kind of break through the noise, if you know what I mean.
Yes, demystify it for us because it can be a little bit tricky to understand when you're looking at the data and it changes so frequently. So if you're able to break through that noise and clear things up for us, I think that'll be a success.
So if it's all right, I say let's dive in.
Yes, let's go for it. I'll hand this to you. Tell us, give us the foundation information. Maybe we start with some terminology.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start really basic and let's talk about impressions. So, one of the most important factors are how often are your ads pulling up? And that metric is impressions. An impression occurs whenever an ad is shown to a shopper based around a particular keyword query or some of the other targeting methods offered by Amazon.
And for clarification, impressions are not, there's no cost to impressions. That's not where ad spend comes to play.
That is correct. There are no costs to impressions. Impressions really help us with relevancy and help us understand where your ads are being pulled and how often. However, you're not charged for it. It just kind of comes with the package and put our advertising on the Amazon platform.
Perfect.
Excellent. And so it sounds really basic, but we have to bring it up. So what's a click? A click occurs whenever a shopper clicks on your ad. And this is when charges actually are applied. The click metric is a count of how many times shoppers have clicked on a particular advertisement, and it's available on the campaign level as well as granular to the specific keywords. So a particular query that we're buying against will show how many clicks that query is generating and also the total cost associated with those clicks.
Great. And are there any, as related to impressions and clicks, are there any, I'd say, red flags that would jump out to you as a PPC specialist that would make you want to dig a little bit deeper into a campaign as related to those two markers right there, impressions and clicks?
Yeah, definitely. So, some things that we notice is obviously when you're bidding on particular keywords, you expect to see impressions and you expect to see clicks. And a major red flag that we notice when we run through our routine checks are the spend and ACOS tracking. And really simple, not to go too far off tangent. If we do not see any charges or any impressions or clicks being pulled for particular campaigns or ad groups, that's a red flag. And what that comes down to some of the times is perhaps there's negative keyword queries in the campaign. Perhaps Amazon deemed the page irrelevant. So maybe the particular query you're striking against is just completely off base to what the actual product is and the details on the product page.
Yeah, those are all red flags that definitely you want to focus in on a little bit more. One that I've always kind of paid attention to when impressions are low, and you want to take a look at the listing itself. And one thing to consider is the price of the product and make sure that it aligns well with the pricing of the competitor landscape and what Amazon thinks the price should be, because impressions have to do with the relevancy of that ad to the customer search. And Amazon wants that relevancy is also dictated by what they see as likely to convert. And so that's where pricing plays a role. So impressions to me, just in looking at listings and looking at the advertising campaigns, impressions were always something that I paid attention to. When they seemed low, that meant we needed to look at the other aspects of the listing and figure out what needs adjustments to help get things moving along again.
Absolutely. And then just to add on top of that, the eligibility of products. So when your inventory runs out, that's something we see often where we'll lose impressions because Amazon's not going to advertise a product that's not available to consumers to purchase.
All leads back to inventory management. How about other terminology when we're looking at the advertising reports that lays a foundation for paying attention to your advertising campaigns?
Absolutely. So some of the other queries that are really important, some of the other terms that are really important are your detailed page views or DPV. And this essentially is when a user clicks on your ad and they end up on your product page. That is an example of a detailed page view. And they could shop around and move around. And this is something that Amazon tracks, how often they come back and what behavior is going on those detailed page views. On top of that, click-through rate is another really important metric. This lets us know how relevant your queries are or your keywords are. And a strong click-through rate is an example of a brand that has strong brand presence. So we have a couple clients that do really well and have high conversion rates. It's upwards of 20% for branded keywords. And it makes a lot of sense to defend your territory and make sure that your ads are coming up for your brand terms. An example of click-through rates that may be lower or the less relevant the keyword is to the particular product, the lower that click-through rate's going to be. And subsequently, usually we'll find that the conversion rates are a lot less. The amount of impressions that are generated tend to be a lot less. So, in advertising, and you'll hear me talk about this a lot, is relevancy is key. It's always great to be experimenting, and click-through rate is an excellent indicator of how relevant that keyword term is to your particular products.
So with the click-through rate, you mentioned, a 20% click-through rate is very high. What would be considered a lower ratio, a lower click-through rate that someone should pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously varies on industry and niche, but I would consider anything under 0.03%, I believe, is the metric that we use to know that the conversion rates are just really low and it's not worth advertising. Generally, with product and research-based type search queries, we see a lot lower of a click-through rate more often than not because the shoppers don't really know what they want. They're shopping around, and we're just trying to stay front of mind. So, making sure our ads and our products are showing up with the potential of a conversion. Awesome. And I'm going to jump into a couple other terms that I think are really important before we jump on to some of the other topics we're going to talk about today. Spend, of course, is really important. You want to know how much you're spending on an aggregate level with the entire campaigns together, but also down on the keyword level. So spend is the total value of the clicks received for a campaign or a keyword. And Amazon provides this information on a aggregate level as well as a granular level to the keyword. And the second important metric when we look at our cost or our spend is our average cost per click, or ACPC. And our ACPC is the average amount that you have spent for a click and is calculated by dividing the total spend by the total number of clicks. And Amazon does this again at the aggregate level as well as a granular level to the keyword level.
Got it. So a lot of different ways of taking a look into your advertising campaigns and your keywords.
Absolutely.
So I think getting those terms clear and understanding, what it all means when you're looking at the columns and interpreting the sheets that you have for your campaigns, I think having the basis of that terminology is really important. But really what it comes down to when you're dealing with advertising is you want to know how the portion of your sales that are directly attributed to PPC. So how do we really take a look into the campaigns and analyze the sales that are attributed to PPC?
Absolutely. And that is where we prove our worth. How much revenue was generated based on how much spend. This is where our ACOS comes from and units sold from our advertising efforts. And at the end of the day, if we're not making money, then we're not doing advertising right. So understanding these metrics and how they play out to the entire user experience and what segment or part of the marketing that advertising is attributed to is detrimental to proving the value behind your ad spend.
So now we have a new rabbit hole or a new angle to go down and taking a look at the campaigns and the information available to us.
Absolutely. And now just to continue with the metrics that we're talking about, I think it's important to understand the units sold metric. So a sale is attributed to a campaign whenever a shopper that clicked on an ad purchases your brand's products on Amazon. The units sold metric counts the total number of your brand's products sold within 14 days of clicking on your ad. So within that 14 days is kind of your first sales attribution window. And if you look at your campaign performance report, we know that Amazon's tracking it on a 1-day, a 7-day, and a 30-day basis. So that 14 days should account for all sales, all units sold for a particular keyword query for a particular product that we're advertising.
So that's really interesting that it's up to a 14-day window. So that means that ACOS can really take quite the amount of time to settle with that big of an attribution window.
Absolutely. And that's why when we work with our clients and we provide reporting, we tend to be about 7 days behind. And I know based on the information we have on hand that roughly within 7 days, we have between 60 to 80% of our sales. So we have enough data for actionable, meaningful steps when it comes to optimizing or expanding keywords or one of the many other things we do to make sure that the account's on point. And
so 7 days gives you enough information to make any changes that are necessary, but it's still not the complete picture.
Still not the complete picture. And the biweekly forecast that we provide will have that entire picture. And that's why it's important when you look at advertising, you look at a longer period of time and you give yourself enough space for that latency to take effect, because nothing's worse than looking on a day-to-day basis and making all these changes and really just chasing your tail, because you won't get the results you're looking for and you're battling against data that's just changing. And a good PPC specialist acts on full and complete data sets.
And so that would be looking at least a 2-week period.
At least a 2-week period, absolutely.
And how does this window compare, like Amazon's window for attribution, compare to like Google?
So Google has a bunch of different types of attribution. So anything from time decay to last click attribute, first click attribute. So there's a lot of different ways that Google splices their information. Google also tracks in real time, so there's no latency when it comes to Google. Same thing with Facebook, there's no latency. And it's just how the Amazon platform works, is that they have a latency period and the system just calculates that way. They'll charge you right away for the clicks, but you generally won't see those sales come in. In defense of the consumer is that they may click on an ad, but they may not purchase it right away. We know based on consumer behavior, if you're accessing it via your mobile device, maybe you're shopping around, maybe you're sharing that information with your wife, and maybe you're not making a purchasing decision for a couple days. So the ad spend is still there and the sale might not come for at least the full 14 days.
Yeah. And I think that difference between the different platforms in terms of advertising, Amazon is an outlier there. And so I think this is important information, because when people are judging the success or not of a campaign and they're bumping that up against the experience they're having on Facebook or the experience they're having on Google, it can be frustrating. So to know the parameters around latency as related to Amazon, I think is really important.
It definitely is. It definitely is. And Google has a latency too, that they're able to project sales and conversions a lot quicker. And they look at also about a 30-day window. So a little longer. But in my experience, it's depending on the niche and the category. It varies based on the searcher's behavior and if they're trying to buy a product versus service and all the research that goes into that.
Got it. Now, when it comes into different ad types, when we're looking at headline search ads or product display ads, how are total sales calculated for those types of advertising?
Yeah, so a total sale is attributed to a campaign whenever a shopper that clicked on an ad purchases your brand's product on Amazon. So the total sales metric is the total dollar value of your brand's product sold within 14 days of clicking on your ad. And this works the same for sponsored product ads, as well as headline search ads and product display ads. So it works across the spectrum.
Got it. So it doesn't ad type, it doesn't matter. It all plays out the same way.
Yep. As long as they're spending money at the end of the day as a result of our advertisements.
That's what we want.
Absolutely.
Got it. So when it comes to, does Amazon attribute sales to specific ads? How does that work?
Yeah, so this is where it gets kind of gray, but luckily Amazon does provide this information. So Amazon uses a last click attribution method of tracking sales. So for example, if I'm a shopper and I click on an ad through a sponsored product because I'm looking for something, and then I share that with my wife, and my wife is the one who ends up making the decision, and perhaps she searches it, she doesn't exactly like what she sees, but she ends up clicking on a headline search ad that has a variation of the products we're looking at, and then she makes that purchase. The sale will be attributed to the headline ad, and that's kind of how it's counted. So it's always based on the last click.
Got it. Okay. So it's the last word of PPC is the last click.
Absolutely.
So are there any other aspects in terms of the kind of foundation of the lens that you're looking through when you're analyzing your accounts?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess the last topic I just wanted to touch on is for sponsored product ads. How do you decide which product sales to attribute to our advertisements? And a sale is attributed to whenever a shopper that clicked on your ad purchases any brand within the same category. So for sponsored products, we'll only count sales of your products when Amazon is the seller. Amazon will not count sales of your brand's products to third-party merchants who may be legitimate third-party merchants or maybe what we refer to as squatters. And you can view these sales in your other ASIN report in the advertising report. And just to simplify this a little more is if I'm selling variations of a widget and the variations are colors and I click on the black color to get to the landing page, but decide to buy the blue color, the black color still gets the credit for the sale because that's where the advertisement was, and that can be viewed in the other ASIN report in the advertising reports.
Interesting. Okay, well that makes a lot of sense, especially when you break it down with the variations there.
Absolutely.
Well, I know the next, now that we've kind of got the basis for how Amazon is attributing or the latency, now we can kind of dive a little bit deeper into attribution modeling, which is very exciting.
Very exciting. I could tell you can't wait to hear more.
I can't. I'm so excited we're at this point. So let's dig into it. Let's talk a little bit about attribution modeling. Why don't you tell us all about it?
Sure. So just to define it real quick, attribution modeling is a set of rules that determine how a sale conversion is credited. In our case, it's how Amazon attributes a sale from an advertisement. And we can see through the campaign performance report, as mentioned earlier, that Amazon has a 1, 7, and 30-day window that they're looking at our sales attribution model. And, to be real clear, Amazon's documentation says that all sales are calculated within that 14-day period. So although we have a 30-day basis in the campaign performance report, we know the 14 days when all the sales should be accredited for a particular time period. And these are the basics of Amazon's PPC reporting. So if we want to understand, why is this important? Why should I care about attribution modeling? By understanding how sales from advertisements are measured, we can more effectively understand the latency factor and how that plays into our particular products. So we have customers in all types of categories. And, for the most part, I could say within 7 days, we have 80% of sales in. But we have particular customers in the food segment as a perfect example that number is around 60% by 7 days. So we have a 40% gap from that 7 to that 30-day period. And it's interesting that takes so much longer, but this is just data what we have on hand from our customers. So making judgments and changing information in an account and trying to strategize with only 60% of your sales generated is not acting on full data sets. And that's why to me and to my team that we work with, getting a full set of data and with this particular client, we wait a little longer because we want to know how effective our ads are and what can be tweaked and changed when we have 100% of sales in and full data sets.
So to be truly effective in your advertising, you need a dose of Zen because you need to be willing to wait it out and see how the data settles before taking any substantive action.
Absolutely. And that's an issue that's just really particular to Amazon. Having worked in the advertising field on social media and through Google and search, generally the results, within 7 days, we have actionable results and we can build momentum and it's a lot quicker. So a lot of the clients are definitely more engaged. And with Amazon, we kind of got to slow them down a little bit and explain, what latency is and why it's an issue. And, something that I like to tell clients when we kick off projects is that it's important to understand that PPC is not a race, it's a marathon. And thinking long-term and looking at your data sets in month and quarterly increments is really effective. And going week by week or day by day is not effective advertising.
So this isn't to say that, we shouldn't be looking at the campaigns or anything more frequently than every 2 weeks or every month. What types of changes, what types of adjustments should we pace ourselves with? What types of adjustments should we allow a longer window of time to pass to allow more of the data to settle before we make those changes.
Absolutely. I definitely don't recommend checking your campaigns once every 2 weeks. That's definitely not what I'm saying.
Negligent?
Yeah, a little bit. But so what's really important? So data we can act on right away. Obviously, the search term report is something we pull all the time. And negative keywords is something that could be added pretty routinely, because if it's not a relevant keyword and it's not converting, it's definitely something that could be added in.
Don't spend money on it.
Absolutely. So anything that has to do with relevancy, can really be done almost immediately as you get the data in and as you research it. Some items that take a little longer for us is when we analyze the data and we make recommendations on how to move forward. So this could be groupings of keywords, because we start off by doing really product-focused keyword research and building campaigns that way. And then from there, we may segment into just different types of keywords. So we have our branded keywords, we have our product-specific keywords, and then we have our research-oriented keywords. And so, for example, with the research-oriented keywords, that's something I want to look at from a longer window, because these customers are researching and they may not be 100% ready to pull the trigger within the first 7 days. So it's important to be a little patient and let that full time frame go by to know, are these effective keyword queries? Are we relevant to users researching about our particular products? So that's an example of how we look at latency and how we use kind of a step back approach when we're making our recommendations for specific keyword groupings or where to take an account from a strategy level.
That makes a lot of sense. So the maintenance and the basic campaign hygiene needs to remain, but the higher level, more strategic work is where you want to have a fuller set of data to work with.
Precisely. Great.
Well, Will, did you have any other nuggets of wisdom around latency and attribution modeling that you wanted to share today?
No, I think I gave all the information I can, but as always, happy to give any further details if users fans of the podcast want to reach out to us at Bobsled. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure as always.
So Julie, you were just telling me about the strategy for the questions that you were asking Will in this interview.
Yeah, I dug into my own little mailbag and I played the role of clients in the interview. That just about every question I asked of Will during our interview is a question that either I have fielded from a client or I know other team members have fielded. So these are real life questions about how to look at the data within PPC on Amazon.
Yeah, so there's a couple of takeaways for me. One is just around how at Bobsled Marketing, we're running campaigns for lots of different reasons. And so part of it is about branding and part of it is about brand protection, like in a branded search. Say I am Kraft and my competitors is showing up for, if someone's searching for Kraft peanut butter and Skippy shows up or something like that, I want to be protecting my turf. Some of it is defensive and some is offensive, trying to win a search from a competitor directly. And then Will also talked about research-oriented keywords. So when someone is searching specifically for a product and they have that direct intent, then that's going to be a different window of time that you're going to look at results versus search terms that are more research-oriented. So I thought that was really interesting in the way that we split out kind of not just the type of campaign it is, but what's actually the intent behind the keyword, and whether it's defense, offense, driven by research, driven by direct keywords. There's so many different ways that we're playing this game, and they all need a different type of way to look at those reports and see if the strategy is effective or not.
Yeah, I think what it also shows is just the necessity. It shows the necessity for a few things. One is patience. You need to allow time to pass in order to see how your strategies are having impact. And the other is that if to manage your PPC in a reactive way, it's possible that you're going to be creating gaps or opportunities, missed opportunities, whatever it might be. You definitely do want to monitor your PPC and make sure there's bid optimization, bid management. You're not running out of budget. You're not running too many keywords that are irrelevant. However, when I say you don't want to be reactive, it's that you need to be operating with a plan. You need a sound strategy behind the decisions that you're making and what your goals are. And I think that Will, the way he mapped this out, really demonstrated a few different mindsets, strategic mindsets, when you're considering managing your PPC campaigns.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I think that being a PPC platform and driven by clicks rather than sort of a branding play, which is more your display advertising, impression-driven advertising, you think it's all meant to be conversion-oriented. But as you guys talked about, there's that intent around just doing some research on Amazon. How do I solve this problem? You were talking about buying a shelf for your office before. And people are searching on there for ideas sometimes, or what's available, what sizes are available, so they can go back and measure their wall and figure out what kind of shelf they want. So it's not always a super short path to purchase. Like you immediately think of Amazon as being a place to go and you buy things quickly, but there's all types of products on there that have different buying life stages, and people are adding things to their wish list, maybe waiting for their paycheck to clear before they actually buy something. Will said also, some purchases you need to confer on with other people, like your spouse, or you're waiting for your kid's birthday to come up or something like that. So there's a myriad reason why looking at your reports every day is counterintuitive and potentially ruining your impact with ads as well.
Yeah, I think that with that approach, you set yourself up to be more reactive and therefore shutting down paths that might have been an opportunity. So I do think setting a schedule of review is a good way to go.
Right. And so at Bobsled Marketing, at the consulting agency where we help brands with exactly this, what schedules are we sending reports out on?
We share basic data on a weekly basis, and we send it for the previous week late on the following week so that we allow a good amount of time to pass and allow sales to settle. It doesn't always hold, though, because sometimes ACOS still changes. But, our clients want to see the data. They want an update of how things are moving along. So on a weekly basis, there's the basic ACOS tracker, ACOS data share. On a bi-weekly basis, we do a deeper share of the data. And that is, I think, the more effective communication around the data, because at that point, you've hit the attribution window and the data is more set and real.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you want to be checking in more frequently to know if some campaign is blown up, or, you want to keep tabs on it. But like you said, to actually get in, analyze it, where's this going? Is this meeting our goals? Then every 2 weeks is the better period.
Yes, for the strategic decision making.
Yeah, it was great to listen to your interview with Will. I picked up a few things as well around, especially because Will has that background with Google as well. It's always interesting to me to be able to compare how Amazon is as a platform versus other popular platforms to use. And like he said, there is lots of attribution considerations with Google as well. And I think if we can leave people with one thing, it's the same with Amazon. It is, you need to be tracking the campaigns separately by intent through a lot of different lenses to be able to get an accurate view of where things are going. So, I mean, for me, it is definitely the work of an expert and someone who really knows what they're doing day in, day out to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff with all those numbers.
I agree wholeheartedly. Anytime I have a talk with the PPC team, I walk away with that feeling.
Yep. Better you than me.
That's why they're the specialists.
Yeah. Thanks for a great interview, and I'll catch you next week.
Thanks, Kiri.